Okay, if my fellow panelists are ready, I'm going to kick us off. I know, or kick off the panel here. I know that there will probably be a few more people joining along the way. So usually, the first part here is going to be a lot of logistics anyway, right? So I just want to say good morning to all of our panelists, all of our participants, and a great big thank you for joining our session today, which is called Delivering the Mental Health Benefits of Nature Contact to Our Children. Today we'll be talking with 4 amazing panelists who are working in the field of delivering programs and measuring programs, particularly for youth in vulnerable or historically underserved and underrepresented communities. So in this session, we'll explore how our panelists are making those connections, what are some similarities between the work that they're doing and the approaches that they're taking, and the ways those similarities incorporate and reflect the research that's been happening around this topic. We'll also discuss how best to measure programs' impact and whether such measurements could benefit youth programming overall. My name is Meg Kelly, and if you participated in the award session this morning, you'll know that I am the Space to Grow Director from an organization called Healthy Schools Campaign, and we're based out of Chicago. We're building green schoolyards that also serve as community parks, and we too are working to support wellness of kids and communities in the most need, because we know that healthy students are better learners, and health and wellness should be incorporated into every aspect of the school experience. So that includes training and making sure that parents have the information, resources, and tools they need to make decisions to support the health and wellness of their kids at schools, and advocate for strong wellness policies across school, for the school district in Chicago, but we do that work on a national, local, and state level as well. And we train teachers to take kids outdoors or to incorporate physical activity or movement and nutrition education into their classrooms already. So we do a lot of work around healthy school environments, from anything from green cleaning to healthy food, and access to health services, and then also the outdoor work that we're doing with our green schoolyards. So I come at this from the program delivery side as well as many of our panelists. But really, we're all talking about the physical, mental, social, emotional well-being of kids and communities. So I think we're all kind of getting in here now, but while we're waiting I'm going to have our panel introduce themselves shortly and do a few logistics. But while I do the logistics, if you could all go ahead and type into the chat who you are and where you're coming from. So maybe just your name, your organization, and what city or community you're located in right now. And then we can get a sense of where we are around the world. So just some logistics. If you participated in any of the panels yesterday, you'll know our format today is that we're going to have a large group discussion that's moderated. I'm your moderator for the day, so you're stuck with me. Hope that's fun. And then we're going to break out into some small groups. So you'll be put into a breakout room, and you'll meet 2 different hosts that are going to ask you some questions so that we can have small group discussions to really dig a little bit deeper into some of the things that we talk about as a larger group today. And then we'll all come back together at the end and have a share out and some time for audience Q&A at that point. So throughout the session, you'll be moved to the groups. You won't really have to do anything. There'll be a blue join button that will pop up when Denise is ready to move us around. So just make sure you click that at the appropriate times. And we've got some breaks built into the day as well. So but if you have any questions or issues along the way, go ahead and put them in the chat, and Denise and I will do our best to address those. Okay, so I'm gonna now kick it over to our panel to introduce themselves. Today, we'll hear from Melanie Borger from she's the Youth Outreach Manager for River Sport Foundation and a 2020 Shift Award winner. Elise Rylander, the founder of Out There Adventures, also a 2020 award winner. Alyssa Solis, who's a science teacher for the LA Unified School District and a field instructor for Outward Bound Adventures, and she's a 2020 Emerging Leader. And then we'll hear from Dr. David Victorson, professor of medical social sciences at Northwestern University, also here in Chicago, and the founder of True North Treks. So team, let's just go around. We'll each have 2 minutes, or you'll each have 2 minutes to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about the work you're doing. So Melanie, why don't we start with you?
Hi, everybody. I'm Melanie, and it's so great to be here. I've learned so much in the last 24 hours, and I'm really looking forward to the next 3. The River Sport Foundation was founded 15 years ago and is located in downtown Oklahoma City. Oklahoma City, if you're wondering. I was wondering the same thing when many years ago before I moved here. And when people think of Oklahoma, they don't really think of rivers and water sports. They think of the Grapes of Wrath and the Dust Bowl, or maybe they think of the tragic bombing in 1995. And the bombing of the Murrah Federal Building is similar to other tragedies around the world. In the days and weeks that followed, Oklahomans really bonded together. They were closer than they had ever been. And this sense of community became known as the Oklahoma Standard. Typically, as like memories fade of a tragedy, so does that feeling of community support. However, in Oklahoma, it didn't fade. The Oklahoma Standard is thriving here still. What is the Oklahoma Standard? Well, officially, if it's not really official, but if it were official, it means service, honor, and kindness. And for me, it is really evident in how organizations and people, individuals, are able to set aside their egos and come together to make Oklahoma City a better place to live. So after the bombing, Oklahoma City also had a chance to really reinvent itself. It didn't want to be the Dust Bowl state anymore. And it passed a penny sales tax initiative to bring capital improvements to the city. One of those improvements was turning a dry riverbed that had essentially become a drainage ditch back into a river. And so shortly thereafter, the River Sport Foundation brought rowing to that river. Anyway, the first boathouse of the River Sport Foundation was unlike other boathouses. Didn't have a fence around it, and it was open to the public. And we formed rowing leagues from Title I schools. Anyway, over the years, River Sport has expanded to really include lots of outdoor recreation, kayaking, stand-up paddleboarding, a ropes course, a Class 3, Class 4 whitewater rafting center, miles of trails, and even just this year, we added surfing. So many of our users are paid customers, but we also have a robust youth program to engage kids who would not normally have opportunities for outdoor recreation. So about 1.5 years ago, the Outdoor Foundation approached us and asked if Oklahoma City would like to be a Thrive Outside community. Thrive Outside is a collective impact initiative where organizations collaborate to change the outdoor culture of the city. So having a large collective impact initiative in the home of the Oklahoma Standard just really seemed like a natural fit. And so the River Sport Foundation is the backbone organization for Thrive Outside Oklahoma City. And we work with youth development agencies, justice diversion programs, health providers, schools, any organization to really engage more kids in outdoor recreation.
Wonderful, thank you so much. Elise, can you introduce yourself? About 2 minutes.
Yeah, so my name is Elise Rylander. I use she, her pronouns. I'm coming to you today from the ancestral homelands of the Columbia, Wenatchee, and Yakima nations in Leavenworth, Washington. And I am the founder of Out There Adventures. I've been in the outdoor industry for about 15 years now. And the impetus for our work with Out There Adventures really came from my personal journey navigating outdoor spaces as a professional and being queer and openly queer, and also seeing a gap between the opportunities that queer youth were participating in or choosing to participate in and what was being offered in outdoor education spaces. So in 2009, 2011 or so, I started to put together the framework for what would ultimately become Out There Adventures, which is an outdoor organization that seeks to connect or reconnect LGBTQ youth and young adults to outdoor opportunities. We do that in a whole host of different ways. And at this point now, we just wrapped up our 6th programmatic season. And we work with young folks, young queer folks from across the country. And our primary program areas are in Washington, Oregon, and California.
Thank you, Elise. Sorry, I have so many screens happening right now, so my cursor is all over the place. Alyssa, could you take the time to introduce yourself for 2 minutes?
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Alyssa Solis, and I'm a middle school science teacher by day. But on the weekends and summers, I'm a field instructor with Outward Bound Adventures, so calling in from native Tongva land in Los Angeles. And folks often get us confused with Outward Bound, which you might have heard of, but we actually have very different missions, very different demographics, so no affiliation. So that adventures part is very important. We're the oldest nonprofit in the nation, dedicated to taking underserved youth of color from the LA area on transformational wilderness experiences. So we do quite a few different things, ranging from environmental restoration crews, which is paid conservation work, which our high schoolers are very excited about, especially during COVID times, to things like Teach Me to Camp, which is a program where we take the entire family, focusing mostly on single mothers is our kind of primary focus for that program, out on camping trips and teaching them the different skills needed to do a successful camping trip, but also talking to them about family dynamics, family goals. So my bread and butter is our High Sierras program, which has been happening every summer since 1954. And, but we also do that, so week-long High Sierras, but then we also do things like next month, I'm taking some students out on the LA River, and we're gonna be camping in the heart of Los Angeles and talking about urban camping opportunities with them. So we're very small, we're very lean, but we have a lot of organizational history and knowledge. And right now we're kind of in this flux period. We're trying to get a better handle on our data, which hasn't really been our strong suit. And we've been around for so long, but the data is kind of our weak point right now. So that's why I was really happy to join SHIFT this year and why I'm really happy to be here with you all.
Wonderful, thank you. It's nice to see you today. And David, time to introduce yourself, please.
Great. Well, I'm just thrilled to be here and honored to be here with Alyssa, Melanie, Elise, and you, Meg. And I hail from Evanston, Illinois, which is in Chicago, where Northwestern University is, where we're the head of professor and researcher in the medical school, where the majority of my research focuses on studying the health benefits of things like mindfulness meditation for cancer survivors, particularly young adult cancer survivors, studying the effects of social connection and ways to decrease social isolation. And also, as of the last 5 to 7 years, studying the effects of nature contact on health. In addition to that paid day job, I'm also a co-founder and executive director of a nonprofit organization called True North Treks. We've been around now for the last decade, and our mission is to help young adults and caregivers affected by cancer to find direction through connection. And after the very disconnecting and disorienting experience that cancer can bring during this age range. Young adults have a completely different cancer experience than a lot of the kinds of populations we think about when we think about folks with cancer. So your 15 to 39-year-old range, it really, when cancer hits and strikes, it strikes differently during this age. So things like education and school, relationships, really important milestones that most of us take for granted are thwarted and derailed, and many can be on a derailed trajectory for years. And so part of what True North Treks does is it helps focus on what we think are 3 crucial connections. The first one is connecting to nature after the very disconnecting or after the very unnatural experience of cancer. Second connection is connecting to others who have walked a similar path. And the third connection is to connect with ourselves through training in mindfulness and in yoga out in nature. So for the past decade, we've been taking groups on free backpacking and canoeing treks in beautiful backcountry wilderness destinations in Wyoming, Utah, Montana, Minnesota, Michigan. And the last couple of years, we were fortunate to get a retreat facility in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, where we can also help others gain access to nature, but maybe without quite so much backcountry intensity, so that they can still participate in our programs, but still be able to sleep in a bed or use a bathroom. And so since the very beginning, because I'm an outcomes researcher and a psychologist, we've been studying and collecting data on the impact of our programs, and just so that we can learn more about what we're doing. So I'm super pumped to be here today. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. So David, if there is a way to talk louder into your speaker next time, maybe try that. But also, folks, you could also toggle the volume on your own computers too, if you have the ability to do that, if you're in a space to do that. Just some thoughts there. So a wonderful, esteemed panel today, and I'm so thrilled to be here with all of you. So I'm gonna stop sharing the screen so that we can get a better look at all of us while we have a conversation. And if anyone needs the information that was on the slide, I'm happy to, I can put it in the chat in a minute. But I think some of the information on there was just, we have a Slack channel for this panel today, which is 2020 SS-Next Gen-Day 2. So continue the conversations in there after this, after the session. Conversations here for now, but this is something meant to go on beyond just our group today. And so what we're going to do now is I do have a set of questions for specific panelists, but this is meant to be a conversation and meant to be organic. So those are just to spark ideas, and I want the panelists to be able to feel free to talk with each other. We'll spend about 3 to 5 minutes on each topic, see where that takes us. I'm confident that we're going to have a lot of great discussions. So, and then if folks want to put stuff in, responses in the chat, we can do our best to address those along the way. But I would say that the Q&A portion for our panelists is meant to be at the end of the session when we come back together and regroup. So just want to make sure everyone understands the lay of the land here for what we're doing. So let's go ahead and get started. And I'm going to start with Melanie and the work that you've been doing. So what are some of the mental health and well-being challenges the community that you serve is facing, and how does your program help address those specific challenges?
Right. Yeah, a good question for Oklahoma. Although I'm not originally from Oklahoma, I'm a proud Oklahoman now, but we consistently as a state rank probably in the bottom 10.
May I host now on a meeting to make sure Zoom bombing does not happen.
Sorry, there was an odd interruption there. So bottom 20% for many things, physical and mental health metrics. And I think this is compounded by the fact that we don't have great access to care, or the access to care is reserved for only the most severe cases. We work primarily with youth in our outreach programs, and we use the National Lunch Program kind of as a determining factor of who we're serving. And Oklahoma ranks 46 in the country, with 60% of the state's students qualifying for the lunch program. Now in Oklahoma City specifically, 98% of the students in Oklahoma City public schools qualify for the lunch program. So we have a lot of kiddos who are living with food and housing insecurity and the emotional trauma, really, that accompanies that. Oklahomans love sports, right? Like college football, Friday Night Lights. It's part of our state culture. But many kids don't find initial success with like a traditional ball sport like football or softball, or they don't have access to it, right? They may be able to join a team on the Y at their school or something, but mom and dad can't afford cleats, right? So, you know, I originally got into this work as a coach, and I believe every kid is an athlete. They just haven't been introduced to the right sport, right? And maybe that sport's fishing. I don't know. You know, we started as a rowing organization, and we started our league of rowing teams at the Title I high schools, really to use that so kids could benefit from team sports, right? The physical fitness and the teamwork, the mentoring of a coach, the stability that they needed. It created some additional stability in their life. And most of our evaluation during this time period was really on physical metrics, and it was very quantitative. But as we've grown to incorporate more water sports, and more of an outdoor culture and an outdoor engagement initiative, we are really kind of expanding our evaluation and our programs. So we offer summer camps, free summer camps to families from underserved communities, right? And when kids aren't in school, parents need childcare. And so we leverage that need for childcare to then introduce them to kayaking or trails or fishing or whitewater rafting. And then we hope that provides like this physical safety net for the families, but it's also a familiar and consistent place for the children who gain this appreciation for the outdoors and share it with their families. And ultimately change the culture of Oklahoma City.
Anyone else want to jump in or add to that? Seeing anything similar in your programs?
I was just gonna add that that component of intergenerational connectedness is a really crucial one, I think, in order for any of our work to be successful and sustainable and scalable as well. So, you know, I appreciate that intentionality and that thought, you know, that y'all are approaching that work with. And I know that I think our organizations, at least represented on this panel, are sort of grappling with that concept in different ways, as are different communities that are engaging, you know, with sort of similar concepts to us. And it's one that I think it's a component of the work that can often be sort of forgotten. And from my time in social services, that idea of like wraparound services is part of that work. But it's a different sort of kettle of fish to be dealing with, but a really crucial component, I think, in order for the programs to be able to resonate the most and have the sort of longer term effects.
Right. Yeah, no, I agree with that too. We certainly at Healthy Schools Campaign have a host of services, right? We take that whole child, whole community, whole health approach. And I think that's critical to the success of our programs. So Elise, let's hear from you some more. So you started Out There Adventures from scratch. And what can you tell us that you've learned over the past 6 years that you would now consider to be best practices? And what do you wish you knew then that you know now?
I mean, so many things I wish I knew then that I know now. But, you know, when I think about our best practices, so we sort of straddle multiple worlds. Their sort of base, our programs are no different than any other programs that are taking people out into the outdoors. So we operate under all of the same sort of structures and with the same ideologies that Outward Bound or Big City Mountaineers or any program that is working with young folks and taking them outside. So risk mitigation, training for staff, all of those things are identical in those ways. And where we really differ is in who is leading those programs. So representation for us is a key component to how our work differs. And I think from that, we've been able to establish some best practices that look a little bit different than other programs, because our instructors also identify as members of the queer community, and as do our kiddos. So it's an interesting question to sort of unpack, because so much of the work that our sort of special sauce with OTA comes from those organic moments that happen in the field, in interactions between instructors and students, or core leaders and core members, that happen organically because our leaders or the adults in those situations have a deeper understanding of what those kiddos are going through. There are a couple of tangible things that we implement that I think do look a little bit different than your sort of typical programs, that I think more mainstream programs would benefit from. So like, we have to be very conscious about our visibility as we're traveling through different spaces, especially in rural America, because we are pretty easily identified as a group of queer folks. And that sort of is flagged in a number of different ways. And because we're traveling with youth, that those components that exist as risk mitigation things that have to be top of mind are sort of amplified for us. And that also extends to our time in the backcountry. So our staff, we go through a lot of work to prepare our staff and make sure they feel good about how to manage the different situations that might arise when they're in the front country, sort of middle country and backcountry. So there's some different practices that we've had to enact on that front. And then other things too, like where, if we are traveling on a bus to Yosemite to get to the trailhead, let's say, what are the opportunities for the kids to be able to use bathrooms along the way? And how are we going to manage that as staff? So sometimes that has looked like calling ahead and being able to identify different places where there are gender neutral bathroom options. And then when we can't do that, we've had to do other things where staff have to like intervene in order to create a safe space for those youth to be able to do something as simple as using the bathroom. So there are some of those nuances that, again, create a culture for us that I think have led us towards sort of these best practice ideologies. And then just not to like totally derail us, but that idea, to go back to that idea of like intergenerational connection, that's something that's really unique for us. Thus far in our history, the kids that have been able to participate in our programs have some sort of support from their family, right? Because they're signing the waiver, they are supporting that kiddo and participating in our program. But even within that, we see a variety of different levels of engagement with the parents. For some folks, they describe a family setting that isn't actually as open as you might think because they are on that course with us. And other kiddos have parents that are sort of bending over backwards to try to support them in their journey, and everything in between. But that idea of intergenerational connection or support from parents is one that we've really had to grapple with. And we've come up with a couple of different ways to try to mitigate that. But it's a really imperfect system ultimately, because at the end of the day, you need those parents to sign those waivers. And we just can't get around that sort of barrier.
And Elise, tell me again what age range you're working with? I'm sure you said it, I'm sorry.
I didn't actually, because it has been a bit scattershot. So generally we've worked with young folks that are between the ages of 14 and 21. The bulk of our kiddos are in I would say like the 16 to 19-year-old range. So sometimes they can sign the waiver themselves, but most of our kids are under 18 and need that support of a parent or a legal guardian.
And sorry for all my follow-up questions. And again, other panelists, please jump in. So then, do you get a lot of repeat customers? So we say so do they start the program and then they might cycle through for a certain number of years, or how long do you stay with them?
Yeah, we are at that point now with 6 seasons under our belt where we are seeing those kiddos come again and again. So we have a handful of students either from our collaboration with Outward Bound California or our collaboration with Northwest Youth Corps that have participated year over year. And even prior to that, when OTA was running exclusively its own in-house programs, we would get the same couple of kiddos, sort of core group of kids every year. And that is one of the really amazing offerings of our program, and I'm glad to see it come to fruition, because that was sort of the vision. But we have had students move through, participating as a core member, to then transitioning into sort of a core leader in training kind of position, and helping to support our core queer cores, and then moving into a position of leadership. So we're getting now to that point where we have, we're sort of establishing that nice pathway of moving from a participant into a position of leadership in our programs.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And thanks for answering my additional questions. So Alyssa, the work that you, or the youth that you work with, are oftentimes representative of the most underserved, often below poverty level, and have little access to healthcare. And Elise touched on this, but as we talk about ensuring equitable access to mental health benefits of nature, how important is it in your work to have Black, Indigenous, and other peoples of color as program leaders, or leaders who are, or what leaders who are truly reflected and representative of the youth that they serve?
Thank you for asking. In my time at OBA, I've come to really believe that this is the most important thing. If your organization is committed to access and equity in the outdoors for Latinos, people of color, Indigenous folks, is that your staff needs to reflect that. And it might be a big shift for a lot of organizations, but I think when you make that commitment to hiring and paying those leaders, it has ripple effects throughout the organization that make the whole organization become more aligned to social justice, which, if it's not explicitly part of a mission statement of an organization that works in the outdoors, I think it should be, because I think the outdoors are inherently a social justice movement. But I was pretty shocked when I started working at OBA, because every other outdoor organization I was trying to work with and work for, they kind of relied on folks to do a long period of unpaid volunteering and work time before they could access the paid opportunities. And I think OBA is unique in that they pay their leaders, they pay them for trip planning, they pay them for the on-course time. And that's a huge relief for Black and brown people who tend to not make as much money. Black and brown youth have no shortage of very well-meaning people who are talking at them. And I get a lot of friends who offer, they say, oh, I have this I'm a friend who's an amazing ornithologist, maybe they can come talk to your youth. And it's they don't really care about a PhD in ornithology. There's very smart, intelligent people willing to help, but the minute that person is a person of color, there's an immediate connection that happens, and a meaningful relationship that starts, because it's not just somebody talking at them, it's somebody who looks like them. So I think that's a part of our secret sauce at OBA. And a part of it is that you need to be willing to commit to meeting folks where they're at. So Elise has mentioned before that it's a priority that your leaders have WUFA certification. And that means that they have the confidence, they have the skills that when you take your youth into the outdoors, that if some sort of medical situation arrives, they have the confidence and the skills to address it. It's very important. But to have it as a requirement of entry to be a leader, it can be sometimes inaccessible for a lot of people of color. So we have an annual Diverse Outdoor Leaders Institute. So each year we have a cohort of 25 people who come to our organization, and we select people based on their life experience and their willingness to learn. So none of them come to us with WUFA certification, and we teach them that. We provide it for free as part of our programming. And it's a pretty intense 5 months training program that we do, but we can't choose people based on traditional metrics. You can't make a college degree an entry for it, because a college degree is one thing, but your life experience when engaging with these youth is so much more impactful. So an example that comes to mind for me is last summer, we had our 6-day backpacking trip in the High Sierras. And I had my choice of leaders. I could have chosen someone else who's Latino like me and had more experience. But we went with a leader from South LA, a Black leader who had pretty much no backpacking experience. And the High Sierras are pretty intense, so some people were kind of nervous. But the thing is, you can teach people how to backpack, but you can't teach people to have that life experience. So we had 5 Black youth on that trip. And he was just able to connect with them in such an immediate way. And like me going, you can do it, you can make it, we got this. That's one thing. But coming from him to them, it was just so much more impactful and the connections were so much deeper. So we invested in him as a leader and gave him that training. And now he's an amazing backpacker because like I said, anyone can learn how to backpack. So I would say, yes, hiring leaders of color, meeting them where they're at, the skills that might not have been accessible to them through their like life experience, and then pay them. And I think you'll see like that investment in leaders of color, there's like immediate differences to the relationships with the youth of color in your programming.
Yeah, I like this idea about being intentional, right? Having it part of our mission statement. And I really, you know, requiring a college degree for a job is really, you know, I think we're moving in a whole different direction in the world right now. And I think that's, you know, making sure your job descriptions and what you're looking for are really what you want and what you need for, you know, not just requiring a college degree just because it's some sort of standard that we've been doing for the last however many years. Anyway, that's my just personal commentary.
Yeah.
But,
oh, you also just reminded me of another example. So our training program isn't just to take the youth on trips. That's kind of like option one, but also to prepare them for other like outdoor careers. So we have another leader in our program. He's formerly incarcerated, formerly gang affiliated, and REI gave us like a free trip to do the Trans Catalina Trail. And they said, can you give one of your leaders this free trip? So we chose him because, again, limited backpacking experience. He was the only Black participant, and everyone else was like a little bit older than him, had a little bit more funds. And they enjoyed him so much out there, and he got so much backpacking experience that REI asked him about hiring him as a trip leader in the future. And can you imagine if someone like him had just applied to REI through the website, through like their traditional application, like, you know, no college degree, formerly incarcerated, like they wouldn't have given him a second look. But seeing him actually out there engaging with people, they're like, wow, this person has skills that we need. So yeah.
That's amazing. And thank you for that example. I think that having those really tangible examples that we can share is, I think, very helpful in how this is really playing out in the real world. Because we can say anything we want, but how is it working? And sort of to that point, I'm going to ask David a question here, because I know he's been trying to document and research some of this. And I'll just remind folks to you can use the chat too if you want. Some of our panelists can try to respond there while we're chatting. But David, let's go to the research. So I know that you've been collecting data about the experiences of the youth you've been serving for the last decade or so. And so what are some of the key takeaways from that research? And is there anything that's resonating with you that you've heard from our other panelists so far in the work that they're doing?
Great. So to start, can you hear me better with the microphone closer to my mouth? All right. I apologize to everybody before. This was supposed to help. To answer your second question, I'm getting all kinds of feels right now from hearing the last three panelists because so much has resonated. We spent a couple Zoom sessions preparing for this, and just hearing some of these things now, it's just coming across so much clearer, and it's just awesome. So I'm excited to follow you all, and also intimidated because of some of the awesome things that you're doing. In terms of the research, people who've attended yesterday's sessions, and I'm sure everybody here at the conference is familiar with some of the usual suspect outcomes that nature-based programs can report in terms of benefit. I'm actually going to share right now in the chat a free PDF to an open access paper that we just published. And sorry for the shameless plug, but I feel like it's a bite-sized piece that condenses a lot of the current research on nature, contact nature as medicine. And so in terms of outcomes, everything from reduced stress, other other outcomes of negative affect like depression or anxiety, things like resilience, growth, positive affect, and then, mental health benefits aside, there's growing, studies to show improvements in inflammatory and immune system pathways, improved sleep, physical function. And so in the paper I shared with you, we highlight the work of some others who really want us to get better as a field when we report and describe on our programs. And this is not just about research, but just about our programs in general, to be able to also help people understand some of the specificities of the program so we can all understand better. So they talk about the spatial scale of your program. Are you putting potted plants in front of someone's room in the hospital, or are you taking them out into big sky country? The proximity, how close or far are you going, urban camping with Alyssa in LA, or are you taking somebody across the country to another location? The frequency of contact, is this a one-time thing, or is this an ongoing program in your school or in your institution? The activities that people engage in, do you specifically have them forest bathe and do really intentional things to connect sensorily with nature, or do you just bring them there and not do anything specific? And then, so there are different things that are recommended in programs to help others know specifically what it is we're doing and why that might be making a difference. With True North Treks, like I said, we've been collecting outcomes data since the very first trek we did in 2010, and that has largely entailed administering pre and post surveys that have both qualitative open-ended responses as well as some Likert type quantitative responses, measuring outcomes from symptoms of depression, symptoms of anxiety, sleep disturbance, appreciation of nature, as well as efficacy to engage nature following, when they go back to their front country lives. We also had a season where we were able to collect blood through a minimally invasive finger prick, and we were able to look at things like inflammatory biomarkers of stress. So inflammation in the body that might change over the course of a week out in nature. And the cool thing, we're about ready to try to publish these 10 years of data, but we found significant, this isn't a randomized controlled trial. It's one of the challenges of this work, but in our pre-post single arm design, we found significant changes in depression and anxiety, meaningful changes, stuff that in research studies you get super excited about because you can see there's a real effect going on here. And even in our biomarker work, we saw significant decreases in a marker called C-reactive protein, which is indicative of how much inflammation is in the body. And we all know that inflammation is good for us after we're injured. Inflammation is good for us if we're needing to run away from a bear, gets us protected. But chronic inflammation is bad for us, and it's a proxy for chronic stress. And so being able to measure some of these things, even informally through a program evaluation, has just helped us really feel good that there's some signal to noise proof of concept happening with our programs above and beyond the statements people make about, I think, at least maybe, or I can't remember who said transformational experiences, maybe that was Alyssa. People who participate often talk about feeling transformed afterwards. So that's just, I guess, in a nutshell, some of that. Just if I could really quickly, in terms of my connection to other speakers, so much from Melanie talking about the work they're doing, being culture changing. I think we all can connect with trying to change the cultures, the specific cultures with whom we work. And Elise talking about special sauce of their programming, we use that word too. We talk about the special sauce. I don't know if that's an outdoor industry thing, but that's something that we've always talked about. And for us as our guides, that'd be something I'd be really curious to hear others talk about, is guide selection and training and professional development, because we don't have a specific algorithm, but we just know when we are when we're interacting with somebody that we feel reflects the, checking the ego at the doorness that Melanie talked about, that, or maybe it was Elise, that we need in our guides. A lot of our guides, we always bring a couple Woofer trained guides for, when we're in the backcountry, but we always also bring a mental health trained guide who's going to be our mindfulness yoga teacher. We have to really drive that message home that we want you to check your clinical skills at the door. This is not, for us in our program, it's not a therapy trip. It's not a group therapy trip. We want you there because of the awesome person you are and the skills you bring. But our population is so tired of being, getting feeling like their heads are getting shrunk in hospitals, going to support groups, feeling like they're with other people who they can't relate to. And so our purpose is simply to provide an opportunity for them to connect in a free and unfettered way. And that's our special sauce, one of them at least, in terms of helping participants, in terms of, I think what Alyssa said, helping them meet us, our meeting them where they are. And so anyway, I'll be quiet now. I know I've probably taken up too much time, but it's just super exciting to hear everybody else share.
No, it's wonderful, and thank you for outlining that. So we do have just about 2 minutes left, and I'm going to ask us to really use those as best we can. And I want the other panelists to kind of respond to David's data, right? He's showing that it is, and just what you see, I mean, you've talked about it a little bit already, but we'll go Melanie, then Alyssa, and then Elise, and just, what is the data that he's showing about the benefits say to you, and what are you seeing in your anecdotal experience?
Right. Meg, like you, I'm a program provider. I'm not a researcher. So when David speaks, I get excited and totally overwhelmed, right? I'm like, a C-reactive protein, what is that? Oh no. But I think that's why these summits are so important. So researchers, like we heard yesterday evening during the poster session, can collaborate with program providers like us. And I have so many ideas on what we can do evaluation wise moving forward. And I think having more robust evaluations would put my organization, I know, in a position not only to better serve our kiddos, demonstrate maybe where we have gaps and how we can better fill those gaps, but also maybe open up more funding opportunities that we haven't been able to explore before.
I got super excited when David was talking about using biomarker data, which, holy cow, that's so cool. And when I think about it, the group that comes to mind is we just sent a crew up to Oregon for 26 days to do some crew work. And, when they left, it was mid-COVID, a lot of social isolation. They didn't know each other. 26 days of doing a lot of labor, clearing trails of invasive species. They come back and it was just completely different people. And I just wish that I had that kind of data, of the biomarkers of maybe their stress levels now that they've gotten to hang out with other folks their age for 26 days after being in their house for a few months. That would have been really powerful information to have.
Yeah, I don't know. We might be diving into these weeds later on. But for us, in trying to find traction, validation, and funding for our work, that idea of being able to quantify the benefits of our program is something that has been consistent and has been a huge barrier for us. And when we think about, and David, you spoke to this, and we think about demographics or populations that experience chronic stress and the toll that takes on the body, and then one's ability to perform even simple mental tasks, be present emotionally and socially, those sort of consequences really ripple out very quickly. And then you see that start to manifest through generational trauma, and that it just continues to go sideways from there. So being able to have access to that data feels incredibly profound for us to be able to, one, validate our work, and then be able to find the funding support to scale it up. And when I think of all of the statistics that exist about the queer community and queer youth in particular, to me, anecdotally and from my own experience, it makes total sense to be able to bring the positive benefits of being outside, as well as being in a very intentional community with other queer folks and supportive queer adults. That being an antidote for all the things that those kids experience makes a lot of sense to me, but we don't have that quantifiable data as of yet. So, you know, if there are opportunities to be able to start to build those types of information sets, I think that would not only be beneficial for us, but then be beneficial for the industry and ultimately our culture at large as well. So if anyone wants to work with us, we're more than happy to begin those conversations.
That is wonderful. And thank you everybody for this great discussion. We are just a few minutes over time, so I apologize to our attendees who are, you know, maybe ready for a quick break. But I think we hit on some really important connections here, and I'm super excited because our breakout sessions that are going to be happening at the top of the hour, we're scheduled for a short break right now, so we have, you know, 7-8 minutes. We'll be diving a little bit more deeply into some of those topics that we were just discussing, and so I look forward to seeing everybody back here. So I'll see some folks in the breakout sessions, so happy to see you there at the top of the hour, and then see everybody back here at the top of the next hour so we can share out and pull us all together. So thank you everybody for your time and attention today. Welcome back everybody. Can I get a thumbs up to make sure my sound is working? Okay, thanks. Appreciate that. I'm just gonna go ahead and get us started here as I get myself resituated. Sorry. Something just popped up that is not working. All right, my apologies as I there's so much there. All right, now I'm good. Thanks everybody. This is like this. I love seeing everybody in person, and you know, the faces and the chit chatting, and it's so great. But I have a hard time doing more than one thing at a time. So thanks for bearing.
Like, you're doing so well. You're doing so well. Thank you so much.
I really appreciate that. Thank you. Okay, so I hope you all enjoyed your small group chats. I know I enjoyed mine, and I appreciate the folks who got to meet my dog during that as he got picked up for his haircut appointment, which I could not reschedule. So anyway, welcome back. And I'm glad that there's so many people who have stayed with us and are rejoining our group. And so what we're gonna do now, and I'm just gonna leave this slide up for another minute to remind us who all of our panelists are today. And as we come back together here, we're gonna take the first sort of portion of this last session to share out what we were chatting about in our small groups. And then, you know, after that, we're going to talk about what do we do next? How do we move this? What do we do to move forward? What's progress look like for us? And also have a chance to take some audience questions from our participants in the chat box or the Q&A. So get those going. If you have questions, we're going to be monitoring the chat so that we can have a nice discussion and try to address as many of those as possible during the last bit of time together. So I am just going to go around and invite our team members here to share what they learned in their group. So when I call on you, if you could please just share your name in case there's new people who missed the panel in the first part. So introduce yourself, what was your question or topic that was of discussion, and then just give us some high level share outs. And so we could each take about 3 minutes or so to do that. And Elise, you're first on my list that I see on my screen, so I'm gonna start with you.
Awesome. Yeah, so for those that may be joining us, my name is Elise Rylander. I use she, her pronouns. I'm coming to you today from the ancestral homelands of the Columbia, Wenatchee, and Yakima. And I'm the founder and executive director emeritus of Out There Adventures, which is a organization, a national nonprofit that connects LGBTQ young folks to outdoor opportunities. And the conversation, the question that I had was around some of the biggest impacts that I've seen for our youth in their programmatic time with us and connecting with the outdoors. And without really, I don't have I have yet to come up with a succinct way of describing this, even though I've been using this idea for years. But what I touched on was the fact that we see all the benefits that you would expect to see, and that all of the panelists and other folks in this space have seen when you're working with youth and connected them to the outdoors. In terms of, it was great to be in a new place. I made new friends. I built new skills, etc. But something that adds to that special sauce of our program with our queer youth is the idea of the queerness of nature and being able to see and respect and love the natural world, because it is not linear like urban spaces. It's not rigid. We love all of the different expressions of everything that there is about the wilderness. And then to be a queer person, and in particular to be a queer youth, it can feel really oppressive to have an identity that goes outside of the rigid boxes that we have all been placed in. And so to be able to be in a place where you see yourself reflected in the world around you is a really profound experience. And then, as I was saying to both the groups, if we get really existential with it, it's almost physically impossible to move one's body in a straight and linear path because of the way that we have to navigate the terrain, whether you're on land or on the water. So I think that's another component of our work that feels really special and sort of unique, is that we intentionally bring that idea into the conversation, and to be able to see that sort of light bulb go off for our young folks is one of the things that I enjoy the most out of our programs. And ultimately that is because it means that they can carry that with them for the rest of their lives. They can't go on an OTA trip every weekend or every year as much as we would like. But if we can help make that connection to them about their identity as a queer person and how queer nature is, they can carry that with them for the rest of their lives.
Awesome. Oh, that sounds like a good set of discussions you had. So good, thank you. And I appreciate you being able to boil all that down for us. So how about Adriana? You want to introduce yourself and tell us what you and your group talked about?
Sure. So my name's Adriana. I'm coming to you from Woodland, California. I work for our Parks and Rec department here in Woodland. And I'll just briefly kind of describe, we talked about standard approaches from other sectors or spaces that might be applicable to youth-based nature programming. In our first group, I was lucky enough to talk to a couple mental health practitioners specifically. And as someone that's in recreation and looking to try to implement Parks RX type programs, it was really helpful because Eric and Kristen were talking specifically about how they have psychosocial rehabilitation groups and group therapy sessions that normally go outside. And we talked about how those sessions and group work like that could potentially partner with us as providers and of programmers and then providers of nature spaces to come together and have those group sessions as a whole, and just kind of co-facilitating between mental health providers and recreation providers to have more capacity to help more people. We also talked about how there's in our second group, we talked about a few different things. David is a landscape architect, and he brought up that we need to ask different questions about our environment and bring up feedback and have these conversations with in the design space. So all of us as experts in our fields need to come to these spaces where decisions are being made and ask for the things that we need of these spaces, because we're personally myself, I wouldn't think to go to a design meeting, and I don't know if the landscape architects would think to come to us and say, hey, what do you need from a park space as a programmer, and just kind of that sort of thing. We also talked about how like the mindfulness community in specifically in schools and after school programs and things like that has done a great job communicating and educating parents and having a lot of success reaching our students and our kiddos in general, and how a lot of those tools could be translated into forests or into garden spaces, and just those sorts of things. There was a lot of different great conversations. And then another comment that came up is bringing up who has use of our spaces and making sure that those spaces are open to different types of programming. So who was it? Justin was the one that brought up that he had an experience where a class of students was kicked out of their space because someone complained that they were messing up the nature and destroying nature. And it's just, we need to be having those conversations of all groups having equal access, and whatever that looks like. So it took a lot of different turns, but it was a very, very valuable conversation.
Yeah, that's great. So a lot of, well, it's good. It takes, taking those turns is good because it inspires, you know, additional conversation. And really it's like, we're trying to bridge all these gaps, right? These non-traditional communities coming together, not necessarily communities, but practitioners or, you know, areas of expertise come together to make a more comprehensive or holistic approach to something. And so how do you foster those connections, right? It's a big challenge. So how about Alyssa? We'll go to you next.
Hi, everyone. So our groups, the question was, what's the biggest challenge or barrier faced by your community that could be addressed by more clearly defined programmatic standards? And what are some potential ways to address them? So some of the biggest barriers that were coming out of these conversations, the first is like a lack of a central database of available relevant literature that could support this work in terms of when you're applying to grants, arguing for the necessity and importance of this work. So it'd be cool to have like a centralized searchable set of data. But in the meantime, Michelle Kondo here from the U.S. Forest Service suggested that the Nature Conservancy has a toolkit for research instruments to assess and evaluate the impact of nature interventions on health. So that's a good place to start and one that I definitely plan to look into. Thank you, Michelle. A big part of our conversation was the transportation costs of getting students to the outdoors. So it seems like a lot of our Parks and Rec folks, but a lot of other folks are doing really good work of bringing nature to the youth, but there's just totally different world when you get the kids out to a park in their community or out to the forest. So a potential way of reducing that, Zoe said, more parks, then there's less transportation cost. So yeah, that's a good point.
Brilliant.
Yeah, Peter Mayfield suggested that a way to promote this work is by comparing our treatments to alternative approaches of what might happen to these youth who don't go in these programs, which is healthcare costs and incarceration costs. But he has been working on getting those metrics. He's been trying to just get a number for like a student who has a nervous breakdown and has to go to the hospital. How much did that cost? The 4 days that that child spent in the hospital, and like getting those numbers has been very difficult. So more publicly available information about the costs, the downstream costs of not providing these services would be helpful to justify this in grant funding. We talked about how great it would be to have more longitudinal data. So if your organization has even been around for 10 years, do you have data on those participants from 10 years ago about how their life trajectory has been different since participating in your program? So as someone from an org that's been around since the 1950s, like I'm really interested in doing that research also. And yeah, that's it. That's it. Just that.
Just that. Just that. Which is, I mean, fascinating. And you know, to your last point, like one thing I would even say is we have tons of data that is, you know, potentially long-term, but the people who are asking us to measure our programs, their priorities change throughout the years, or we have new funders who keep coming in over the years. And so even though we're continually tracking metrics for years and years, we're changing the metrics we're tracking. So how do you, you know, align those or reconcile those over time? Because as a nonprofit, we're sort of forced isn't the right word, but you know, we're compelled to measure new things all the time. So, and we can't continually do so. Anyway, I know that's an issue that most people that might resonate with a lot of people. So I'm not going to belabor the point. David, you want to share out from your group for us?
Absolutely. Had an equally amazing set of conversations, I think, and our question was, what are some core areas of impact you're measuring that you feel other programs would benefit from as well? In terms of just some of the core areas that came up during our popcorning around, one was increased confidence, sense of belonging, restoration, both personal restoration as well as restoration of native spaces, increased openness to experience, increased engagement, being more emotionally connected to others, academic outcomes or academic increases, changes in the environment itself. So is the water quality better? Or is there a return of native species or animals coming back? Rebranding environments that have historically suffered stigma of space and safety issues, environments that back in the day used to be big plantation or near a prison or other constraints that might tarnish its image, and trying to work on ways to integrate those real stories into the current environment. As well as participation metrics, just things like attendance, number of programs delivered, and things like that. So those were some of the highlights in terms of impact areas, but our conversation turned also to how we're doing that. And it was Dakota, Jim, who brought up that in indigenous communities that she's working with in New Mexico, the whole notion of these quantitative surveys or biomarkers doesn't always lend itself so easily to some of the populations that she's working with, both for historic mistrust of research and evaluation, which many of us are familiar with because of some of the horrible things that have been done in the name of research, but also because of a different cultural style of expressing the stories. And so Dakota talked about an indigenous evaluation framework that she and her team have developed, which actually collects stories through more oral tradition and storytelling methods, which was just amazing. And that led a whole bunch of others to talk about the importance of the open-ended, qualitative, more anthropologic, ethnographic kinds of information that we can get from our programs. And how that led to also conversations about community-based evaluation, where we're bringing our communities in to do the evaluations with us, so that we're doing this with them and not on them, that they're a part of helping us understand and identify what are important metrics to measure, so that it's meaningful for them, and that so that they're more likely to bring it back to their communities to share the stories, and not just, you know, having it end up in a database that nobody opens up. So it was a really thoughtful conversation that I was excited about being a part of. Before I give up the mic, I just wanted to put in a plug for, in our organization and in a lot of the research that I do, we use a set of free instruments that were created with NIH monies. Comes from a website, healthmeasures.net, and you can get access to lots of really good free brief questionnaires or self-report measures that can measure a whole host of health status, well-being, emotion, functioning kinds of measures that you might want to consider. You know, some of these measures are as many as 4 items, if it's possible to add those. So I just wanted to put that plug out as well. So that's it.
Great, thanks. And if there is a way to share that in the chat, I know I personally would be interested in your plug. So I'm going to turn it over to Magali to share from your group.
Thank you, Meg. Magali Rojas, preferred pronouns she, her. I am from Kansas City, Missouri, but I am currently in Wyandotte County which is the county I work for in the health navigation department for a nonprofit organization called El Centro. And I like to start off by echoing let's start off with the question, which was, what type of evaluation have you done to measure the impact of your programming on kids and communities? What other information, data, or evaluation would help you measure, improve your impact? So echoing from what Alyssa had said, one of the biggest barriers, again, is transportation. And I think that's just so important. Like, it's true. If we were to have something to solve that, would be having more parks in the area. Another thing that was mentioned was working with a lot of different universities to improve and monitor evaluation and education, and then how the importance of offering those students jobs. Perry mentioned that 75 to 80% of the students are hired after the work. And during this time of COVID, they created programs that have given the ability to provide free STEM kits to those students who qualify for free and reduced lunch during this time. And something that I've heard repeatedly is that they would like to have and receive more information from parents, because the parents are not really involved, which I was actually surprised with. But it makes sense when you have parents that are also working full-time. Connie, she is a certified therapy guide in Iowa. She doesn't really work with the children directly, but the program that she works with reaches out to special needs kids that love forest bathing. And she mentions how, getting them introduced to them, getting a taste helps get rid of the fear. And also identifying things that helps the kids, like custom soft animals and puppets. And they help also with the underserved kids who do not have a way to get there, again, because of transportation. And Cynthia, she works with a tribal group, and they have drop-off sites, and they have also been donated transportation to help get the kids to the reservations. And one of the goals would be to pay one of the tribal members to do that. So that's important too, if you're gonna have them working, get them paid, because they're the ones who started this, so recognize that. Let's see, she does have a question. She says, does SHIV have something specific that can be used to evaluate? Because many of the times, they have so many things going on that they don't really have measures of evaluation or even thought of them. And how can they quantify and evaluate during throughout the work she does? And a base for mental health being would be beneficial as well. And then on the second conversation, Ross mentions he does a number of evaluations and collects data that's pretty broad. He also does it through online hard copies and photos, which help tell the story. The parents and the children are both asked to engage in the data collection. Andrea says that she does more work on qualitative versus quantitative. The measures are important, but what is done with the information is equally important. A way that she has helped connect is through a video, which helps make that emotional connection, which I think is so important, because there's no point of having all this data if you don't know how to interpret it. And let's see, Jan says that they're currently developing NatureRx and that they had to stop due to COVID, which, for everybody has been something that we've all been facing. And it's been a little bit difficult for us, but we're still pushing through, which is great to see. And she says she works with a group of students that start from kindergarten through middle school. And since it's such a big range of students, it's kind of hard finding, that those measures that will help evaluate them all. So different. let's see, Catherine, she started with Mid-Penn Regional, and she works with 4th and 6th graders. And they are taken through various ecosystems, but she doesn't really have anything to measure the work as well. So definitely having something set up really does help. And at the end, I think Andrea she had a great question. She says, do you have anything in your organization helping remove barriers? And if so, what are they? And Ross said he does. He has a plan with racial and equity plan, bringing in experts that do the work. So it's important, like if you know people that are already doing the work, bring them in so that they can help out and build that bridge, especially if you have people who don't speak a certain language. Bring that in as well, because now we have more Spanish speakers and we need that information in different languages. And the next phase would be to bring the community, including those. And then that information that he's gathered, he said he stole, but I'm gonna say he borrowed from different places like New Zealand, Canada. And I think it's amazing because like, if you have this information out there already, why reinvent the wheel? Just go ahead and use it.
Exactly. Yep. That's without a doubt, we should not be reinventing the wheel. There's so much great information and great methods and standard approaches to how we can be doing some of this work. And so I'm glad that you guys really got there. And I'm going to move it to Melanie next. But before I do, I just wanted to really highlight what you were saying about telling the story. We can get all the data we want, but what does it mean and how are we interpreting that and how are we communicating it to our stakeholders, to our funders, to our partners, to the people who we're serving, right? So that was a very good point. So Melanie?
Yeah, and I think that's a good segue into our question. You know, I had a lot of fun in the breakout rooms. They were totally, my 2 rooms were totally different and both really fascinating. So our question is, what is important to show funders to demonstrate efficacy? And in our first room, most of the folks were either affiliated with a nonprofit organization or a government agency that, or maybe another organization that received government funding. And, you know, a couple common themes from that room were they really felt funders only wanted quantitative data. That they wanted to know how many people were participating, the frequency of participation, the demographics of the people participating, and they wanted to be able to, whether it was the city council or, you know, some foundation who, you know, distributes 100 grants, just wanted to collect the data so they could put it in the report. And that was their primary concern. And we talked about if, you know, since this is, this year's summit is focused on mental health, if we had a standardized way to measure the mental health benefits of nature connections, would that also be helpful in maybe increasing funding? And I think everybody in the room agreed that that would. I think there was one great point made by Catherine, also, you know, distinguishing between the mental health benefits of being outdoors for the general population versus the therapy you can provide to patients who already maybe have a mental health diagnosis. And being sure that in these conversations that we have, that you know, we understand and that there's a distinction between the two. And that kind of leads me into our next room. The next room, we had a couple mental health providers who use Nature Connection to do their work, to serve their patients. Kristen uses horticulture, and Eric, who's uses wilderness therapy and uses Eric has a trailer that he takes to the park and sees patients. That's kind of their intake point, but then he's got bikes and stand-up paddle boards and engages them in these outdoor activities if they're interested, and provides therapy at the same time. So really interesting work that Kristen and Eric are doing. And so, but, they're mental health providers. They're not necessarily writing to the local community foundation for a grant. They're billing Medicaid and private health insurance. So we really started talking about, okay, we got these health insurance companies out there that are making some money, and we are saving them money by engaging all these folks in the outdoors. How can we demonstrate that to them so we can either bill them for this stuff in a formal traditional medical way, or they can start kind of sponsoring or funding these in another avenue. So I hope that generally sums up what we talked about in my rooms. And if I missed an important point, I apologize to my great to the great people in the breakout rooms. So thank you.
Well, that was fascinating. So I appreciate all of that. And I like how it's sparking these new ideas. How do we support this work in a longer, in a broader way, in a more long-term way? And our funding sources for this work is from the program side, right? From the programmatic side that our panelists are providing, those sources change constantly. Foundation, if we're especially supported by foundations who change their priorities to respond to whatever is, the most pressing issue of the day, that's, we have to be nimble too all the time. So, and in always finding new sources. So I'm going to try to share very quickly about our group. And Elizabeth and I ended up in the same room together, and I'll just admit I kind of hijacked it. So we ended up having a very good conversation. My initial question that we were answering was, and part of this is, builds off of really everything else that we were just talking about. But in order to scale or replicate some of our programming to bring this broader than just us, just our individual programs, we do have to often prove our impact, right? So what impacts are we measuring and how are we measuring those is where we started. And then we went, I thought the conversation, and then we ended up having because we ended up not switching rooms, and our group ended up staying together. So our conversation ended up flowing really nicely, I thought. So we started with a lot of our folks who were in our room are measuring participation metrics, usage, who's using it, how are you feeling before and after. And so we had folks who have trail programs and park programs and work with schools as well. But everybody is doing the same kind of work as our panelists and making sure everyone's getting outdoors, right? So we're starting from there. And so then how do we really measure some of that stuff? And so surveys, of course, are things that people use all the time. We talked about using QR codes. And then when we started talking about that, we really started talking about, well, themes that were mentioned throughout everyone else's share out is, well, a QR code is great, and like my organization's been thinking about it, but not everyone has access to the technology. There's barriers to being able to pull people that way or ask them to participate in that way. And that really kind of sparked a conversation about access and barriers, and a theme that I think has been mentioned throughout from all of our other readouts. But then what we said was, well, how do we try to solve some of those things? So making sure that our, youth who are in most need are able to access the services and the programs that we're providing. How do we, obviously people mentioned transportation, that's one type of barrier, but there's so many types of barriers. And how do we, start to overcome those or solve those? And again, a theme that I heard from everybody else was making sure that we're involving the community from the outset, that we're creating things that they say they want, that we're not just coming in and saying, I know what's best for you, right? So I think we all kind of know that. We've learned a lot about the work that we're doing over the last many decades, but really getting that community involvement from the get-go. And then really, I think at the end, what we started talking about was that partnerships are key, and those partnerships, those people who you may not think are, think of initially would be, how do you, bridge some of those gaps again? We talked about, and again, this was something that came up in the main stage this morning, was like, okay, what do you do in the winter time in these areas that are very cold or snowy, and making sure kids are still getting outdoors? And it's like, well, we can all still go outdoors, and we know that, but we need to have the proper coverings. So how do we make sure that our kids have the right boots, the right gloves, the right hats, jackets, just access to those types of things? And that's easy. And there's a lot of corporate sponsors or partners or other sort of entities or organizations. That's a very easy ask for kind of a small money, just to have a set of extra clothes ready to go for kids who need to come and participate in our program. So we really talked about a lot of things. I'm sure I didn't do the whole conversation justice. So Elizabeth, I am just going to call on you, if you don't mind, since you were part of our group, to say, if there's anything I've missed that you think needed to be highlighted, please do share.
Hi, I think you did a really good job. There were some specific examples, but I don't want to go into too much detail without asking people first. So no, I think that was a good roundup. Thank you.
Fair enough. Thank you. I appreciate it. Okay, so we have like 10 minutes left, or maybe a little more than that. I'm going to double check my time there, but while I do that, I would like to turn it over to the panelists, to David, Alyssa, Elise, and Melanie, and ask for your response to what you've heard from other groups, but also what does that inspire you? What do you think we need to kind of do next to move forward? What is next for supporting them, connecting our kids to nature to support their mental health? Where do we go from here, in your opinion? And while we do that, if there are any audience questions, try to get those in now so that we can answer those in a few minutes. So everyone just take maybe about a minute or a minute to respond. And David, let's start with you.
Thank you. I'm going to focus on what an observation that I've had before this meeting, and even more so now during today's meeting, is the need to get federal acknowledgement and funding support of this work on a more regular basis. I do in addition to the nature contact work, a lot of my other work is focusing on tried and true 2,500 to 3,000 year old practices like mindfulness or yoga that we have known throughout the history have been beneficial for us. And they're really hard to measure and study. It's hard to find an appropriate control group. There's all kinds of research issues that make it hard, but they have continued to find their way more and more into the front of the NIH and other groups, so that now you can get a $5 million research grant to study the effects of mindfulness in XYZ population. And I don't see nature contact interventions and programs as being that different in terms of some of the similar challenges and struggles. So just this morning, I was communicating with an NIH program officer about this conference and about the need for NIH support, because I feel like once that has been established, people are going to come out of the woodwork to continue to help this field grow. So that for me is one area that I feel like is really important to seek and find. And the cool part in this communication today is there's a specific institute at the NIH called the National Center for Complementary and Integrative Health. They're the ones who will fund programs in yoga or acupuncture or these complementary alternative programs.
And the case that I'm trying to make is that nature contact is no different in many of the same ways. And so she said she could definitely see a fit for this kind of funding in the future, if we can kind of get on the same page with methodologies and measures and goals and things like that. So my soapbox.
We'll take it. Alyssa, please.
I just first off want to say thank you so much to all the researchers here who have provided these resources. Like, you've already made Outward Bound Adventures at least better with all of this. And I think this has inspired me as somebody who's on the committee that helps run our Diverse Outdoor Leaders program. We have, you know, not everybody's going to be taking kids backpacking in the High Sierras. That's just not everybody's idea of a good time. So we have some leaders that do more car camping, depending on their interests. And now I'm kind of inspired to have one of the tracks be like how to do research about the outdoors, and like a training program that includes all of these resources, and so that they can be a smaller committee within our organization that helps track this kind of stuff, helps stay on alert for all this new stuff. So that could be a smaller track within our Diverse Outdoor Leaders group that would also help them develop some of these skills, and then keep us more with our finger on the pulse of where research is at. And I'm really excited about that idea. So thank you.
I muted myself, sorry. Melanie or Elise, anyone want to jump in?
Yeah, you know, going off both what Alyssa and David said, I've just really been blown away by the diversity of people who are at the summit. You know, I wasn't familiar with SHIFT more than 6 months ago. So all the research, you know, because I'm not a researcher, it's just so impressive to me and so fascinating. And all the healthcare providers that are on here as well. And then there are so many people who wear, like David, who wear multiple hats, and really see the opportunity for not only connecting program providers with researchers, with the healthcare providers, but also coming together as a collective, you know, to go towards David's goal of getting federal recognition. You know, if we were all to, you know, lobby our government representatives in this area, and they were hearing it from, you know, academia, and they were hearing it from the healthcare industry and from, you know, service organizations, like it would be just such a strong impact, I think. And so I think there's so much opportunity for us all to collaborate and work together to achieve, you know, these common goals.
Yeah, and I was just going to add on to that, because I was thinking sort of similarly along those lines around collaboration or being in more solidarity with each other. And I was, what Dakota had mentioned about sort of the connection, the relevancy, the historical tensions with Indigenous communities, or you know, in particular certain Indigenous communities, and the idea of you know, researchers coming in, and then also how stories or how information is, what information is deemed valuable, how it's collected, and there was a lot of resonance with me around just the brief description or synopsis that you provided, David, with the queer community and the way in which our overall community, if you're to make it sort of a monolith, has interacted with like the powers that be, with healthcare institutions historically, and also how stories are not captured, and the ways in which those the sort of folklore of that community is furthered because of the interesting lack of like familial connection. So this is all to say, I think that there's another component of all of this work that we can do that also stands in solidarity with more groups to advocate, like when we're having these conversations with funders that are really all about, you know, you can't manage what you can't measure. We are very quantitatively driven. to have that conversation and ask them to interrogate that a little bit and be like, that might work for our organization. We might actually be able to provide that for you, but I want you to consider the ways in which you're missing out on being able to support a lot of organizations and communities for whom that's not necessarily as relevant or applicable, and you're actually not making yourself accessible and open to collaboration and partnership with them. So I think with that, there's that component of continuing to push ourselves to educate ourselves and educate our organizations on how others are interacting or not interacting historically with these sorts of opportunities, so that we can then, when those people aren't able to be in those spaces and aren't welcome in those different meetings or don't have those different opportunities, we can do our best to try to be there in solidarity with them. So that's sort of that extra component that I was thinking about along that collaboration piece.
Yep, perfect. And I think the collaboration, so I think one of the things we've talked about a lot today in our groups and as our panel is making sure, is this access issue, right? And it's access for literally everybody, right? We want our programs to be, we want to be able to support the mental well-being of the people who need it most. And a lot of times that tends to be the people who are from, who have been living in lower income areas, who have been suffering food insecurity, who have other sort of, the ACEs, right? The adverse childhood events, things like this, or I'm sorry, I'm not a researcher, so I'm not as good with the lingo, but you all know those. But we want to make sure that we're supporting the kids who are really, again, who have the most need. And I've appreciated that everyone that we've been talking to, or that I've so far been talking to today, is really being intentional about reaching out and finding new ways to engage and to recruit leaders to help provide the services that our programs are doing. So one thing, I'm just going to switch gears. One thing is that we talked about in my small group that I forgot to mention, but I think is also a good kind of audience question for our panelists, is the impacts of COVID. And how are we changing our programming? How are we, and what are we measuring too? Because we know that this is impacting youth in incredible ways, right? So I gave the example of my sister, who works for a school district in a suburban school district near Chicago, who they started out virtual learning this year for the school, and they're starting to roll in hybrid, bringing some students back into the building. And my other sister just asked her, so, hey, how is it going this week? And she said, they're terrified. And it's like, this is a safe space where you've been, or hopefully it's been a safe space, or a space that you've known for a long time. And you're going back to it, you're terrified, you have this anxiety. How can you be a healthy student and a better learner if you're under that amount of stress, right? So that's just one example of the many ways COVID is impacting the people who we're serving. So to our panelists, what is it that you're changing, or if you haven't changed it yet, what do you feel like you need to work on or think about or do to address some of our impacts from the pandemic? And I'll let anyone wants to jump in.
I can.
Yeah, over the spring when everybody was all at home, and I would be working from home, and I would be my 2-year-old would be sitting on my lap, and I'd be helping my 6-year-old with a Zoom call for kindergarten, and my 12-year-old was gaming and not doing his math homework. And I totally felt overwhelmed. And at night, I would think to myself, yeah, but like, I have a job, I have my health, my kids have computers to do online school. Like, I can't even imagine like how stressful this is for me and my kids to for families who don't have all the luxuries my family have, like how they're doing it. So, you know, and it occurred to me, I was like, well, I guess I can do something about this, right? Like this is what I do. So it was very important for us to continue our summer programming this year. That kids needed a place to go. Parents needed a safe place for their kids to go and be. And we were going to leverage that need to expose them to all the benefits of outdoor recreation. And then, like many school systems, Oklahoma City Public Schools decided in August that they would be virtual through October 31st. And, you know, a lot of times the majority of our program kind of changes, you know, through, you know, once we have summer programming, then once we do the school year, we kind of do a once a week after school, a lot of programs around that format. And we realized, oh, we can't stop. We just got to keep doing summer programming all through the fall. That parents depend on schools for childcare, for meals, for recreation, for education, and people, you know, organizations needed to step up. And so we continued this through the fall. We've got tons of kids down at the boathouse. They bring, like, our district supplies each of the kids with a Chromebook. And then if you're in second grade or under, you get an iPad maybe. And so they bring those supplies to the boathouse. We have study hall time where their teachers engage with them. They do their schoolwork. And in between, if they are at a down point, because every kid's kind of on a different schedule depending on their grade, the counselors will take them outside and go kayaking. So we kind of did this really reactionary. So we haven't done much evaluation with it. We're trying to solve a problem really quickly, and I'll shut up now and let other people speak.
That's great. Alyssa, Elise, or David, feel free to jump in.
This is like completely unrelated to the work we normally do, but as soon as the shutdown happened, we started partnering with a local grocery store, and we started running a food security initiative for folks whose parents had lost their jobs or income from COVID. And so we basically, our office became a food pantry. Nobody really discussed it just happened, and that ended up being how we got many of our students on our summer Sierra's backpacking program this summer. So it's very interesting, just trying to be like being so small, being so lean, able to pivot towards like whatever direction it seems the community needs. And then the other biggest change that happened is our vans, our famous vans that you can see in our community. We had to split up the kids as much as possible instead of cramming them all into one van, where a lot of like usually really important bonding happens on the way to and from our trips. But obviously we spread them out, so it was much quieter, and our transportation costs doubled, you know, because we had to pay the drivers and the gas for 2 separate vans, even though they were half full. And so that's something that like, it's a big cost for our organization, but like it's a precaution you have to take. And I'm proud to say that none of our 7 youth and 3 leaders that we had on that trip, they all tested negative when we returned. So.
Yeah, we, I think maybe had like a similar experience, and our programs lived on in the form of 2 conservation corps going out this summer. And I really can't give enough kudos to our partners at Northwest Youth Corps for tackling that whole situation and trying to figure out, you know, how are we going to the best of our ability, mitigate COVID coming into this little family unit that is being created. So Jay Satz over there did a lot of work and heavy lifting, as did many other folks in the outdoor education world. So we talked to a lot of our partners at Outward Bound and across the conservation space. So no, tons of really great information sharing was happening to make sure those programs were able to move off the ground. So we were able to get that going, and that for me felt even perhaps more important than our backpacking trips going out, because that Conservation Corps program, those kiddos are compensated for their time. So it's and some of them are helping to support their families for whom parents have lost jobs. So I was really glad that we were able to get that program out. And then I'm actually looking to work with all of our alumni to put together a winter sort of virtual adventure challenge event so the kids can stay connected, get outside, learn different components of sort of outdoor history and conservationism throughout the US and other things that are related to outdoor recreation throughout the winter, as well as trying to stay connected to each other, but in a virtual sense. So there'll be, safe social distancing by many thousands of miles potentially. So those are the two big initiatives that we've been able to kind of get lifted off the ground this year.
All right, with 1 minute left, David, do you want to respond?
Sure, very quickly. We, because of the population we work with, many of them are immunocompromised. We canceled our backcountry backpacking and canoeing treks in the 2020 season, and have been delivering bi-weekly mindfulness classes over Zoom. And because we're fortunate to have a nature-based retreat facility on 127 acres of incredible forest land, it's allowed us to modify our programming to bring groups of mostly survivors and their family members, so people who are within each other's bubbles there for more smaller group experiences, instead of bringing a group of strangers together for a week in Montana. That had to take a pause, but we were able to pivot and offer a whole new kind of programming that we weren't even thinking about. So it was kind of cool, because we're going to continue to do this because of how successful it was, but that COVID forced us to think a little bit outside of the box for.
Yep, I can definitely relate to that. COVID has definitely made us think outside the box, and then in ways that we're like, oh, we're gonna always do that. Yeah, I get it. Totally. So good. I'm glad that we all have seen a little bit of positive from this wild ride. Okay, so we are 1 minute over, but so close to on time. And I want to thank everybody who stuck with us through it all. There's been so many great resources shared in our chat box. I also just put in our link to the channel in Slack. Feel free to share them there too, so they continue to be accessible. Continue the conversation there. And I just want to thank our panelists for a wonderful conversation and all the great work that you're doing. It's been an honor to be moderating this session with you all and with all of our participants. I enjoyed meeting so many folks today. And again, this is my first shift too, so thank you for welcoming me and allowing me to do this with you all today. With that, I'm just going to close it out and say thank you, and enjoy the rest of the program.